Trimflow 2.0 has been released and it's time for an updated tutorial. This video is about getting you started with the basics, which is drawing trims onto meshes and adjusting them. But we will also take a look at some new functions. If you already bought Trimflow in the past, then this 2.0 update comes with no extra cost. Also, it is still backwards compatible even with Blender 3.5, so there shouldn't be a reason to miss out on the new version. Once you purchase Trimflow, there are two files you need to download: the add-on itself and a resource package. The resource package contains some trim sheets, a blend file with the geometry nodes tree that provides the core functionality, and the example projects. Extract the files from the resource package and put them together somewhere on your computer where they will not get lost. If you have been using a previous version of Trimflow, you can simply overwrite the old resource files. Also disable and remove the add-on in Blender, then restart Blender before installing the new version. Once that is done, inside Blender's Preferences, go to the Add-on tab and click Install. Find the downloaded Trimflow zip file in the file browser and install it with a double click. Then click the checkbox to enable it. After that, in Trimflow's Add-on Preferences, set the path to the resource files that you extracted earlier. A little note will tell you once everything is set up correctly. Make sure to save Blender's Preferences once you are done. Now that everything is set up, let's create something. Once an object is selected in Object Mode, the Trim tab will be available next to your other 3D viewport panels. The Create New Decal panel is there to add new decals to the selected active object. Before we begin, let's switch to Material Preview Shading so that we can properly see the decals when we create them. The most important thing that we need to create our decal is a material that is able to display trims, and of course a trim texture. We will go over the specifics a little later. We do not have such a material yet, but we can simply create a new one with the button in the panel. This default material already has a trim sheet assigned. It is one of the sheets from the resource package. You can change the texture if you want. Below the texture selection, there is another drop-down menu that lets you select a trim from the trim sheet above. If you use a new trim sheet of your own, you will not see such a menu without a little extra step. Don't worry about that. We can also set the width of the decal here. This is just the initial value. It can be changed anytime after creation. Once we have everything set, we are ready to create our decal. Trim decals are defined by curves that serve as a path. You can either use an existing curve or draw a new one manually. For using an existing curve, first pick that curve here. Then click the second of the two Create buttons. We don't have any curves to choose from yet, which is why this button is disabled right now. Instead, we will create our decal by drawing a new curve with the Create and Draw button. Once this has been clicked, Blender immediately switches into edit mode with the Draw tool, and you are required to draw directly onto your target object. Let's do that. A curve for Trimflow should only have one spline, so draw only one stroke. Don't worry about precision. We can change the curve later anytime. And here is our first decal. Don't worry if it doesn't turn out perfect immediately, you can always adjust it later. Let's add a second decal, but this time, we first create a curve for it. The closer the curve is to the surface of your target, the better the result. As always, you don't really need to be careful. If something doesn't come out the way we want, it will be an easy fix. Selecting the target object again. Now that the curve is created, we can use it as path for our next decal. Let's also pick another trim from the sheet. And once we push the Create button, we already have our new decal. Now it's time to make adjustments. So let's close the Create panel and move on to the Edit Trim Decals panel. The decal stack at the top is a list of all decals that have the same target object as the currently selected decal, each with visibility options and buttons for removal. Below in the subpanels are the individual properties of the selected decal. As of Trimflow 2.0, each decal is an individual 3D object. You can select it either in the 3D viewport, in the outliner, or by clicking on its name in the stack. At the top, we can see our target again. We can always change that target object if needed. The stack can become quite long if there are many decals on the same target object. You can then use these toggles to filter the displayed decals by their collection, parent object, or visibility. Let's move on to the decal properties. They are divided into 5 categories. In the path settings is a selection for the curve that is used for the selected decal. We can choose another curve anytime, reduce the length of the decal with the start and end sliders, or change the direction. The Edit Curve button takes you into the curve's edit mode with one click. Trust me, you are going to love that button. Draw New lets you draw an entirely new curve for the selected decal, just as when we created the decal in the first place, but you will keep all the settings that you made. As a tip when editing and creating curves, set Blender's snapping tool to Face and the handle type to Automatic. Extruding and moving curve points is very easy this way, and you can always come back for fine-tuning later. Each decal is actually a strip of polygons that is created procedurally. The geometry settings let you adjust the properties of that polygon strip. By the way, you should always enable wireframe display in the overlay settings. This makes it much easier to see what's going on here. The amount of polygons or segments is calculated automatically. If your decal should ever have too few polygons to follow the curve properly, you should add more segments here. The subdiv setting works just like Blender's subdivision surface modifier. It evenly subdivides the decal's geometry. 1 or 2 is usually fine in most cases. In other words, increase segments if you need a closer representation of your curve, and subdiv if you need more polygons for better alignment to the target surface. Width is an obvious one. For extra precise adjustments, click or shift-click the little plus-minus buttons next to the slider. For variable width, adjust the radius of the curve points. Lateral offset is extremely useful to shift the decal sideways or for creating parallel decals. The fastest way to do that is to shift-click the duplicate button below the decal stack, which automatically creates an offset duplicate. Don't push it too far though, there are always limitations. Height offset is the distance between the decal and the target object. You might want to set it as low as possible as long as you don't experience Z-fighting or clipping issues during rendering. The little toggle next to it, which is enabled by default, shrink-wraps the decal automatically onto the target object's surface. If this is turned off, it will stick to the curve instead. The raycast option for shrink-wrapping can be enabled for more precision, which is very useful in some edge cases. In this example, decals often go across several plates. Enabling raycast makes for a much cleaner result. Finally, a decal can also be mirrored across any axis. In the material settings, you can change the decal's material or replace the trim sheet that it uses without going into the shader editor first. Note that replacing the texture is a change that happens inside the material. This means that other decals using the same material will be affected by this change as well. By shift-clicking on the Material Properties button, Blender switches immediately into the shading workspace, allowing you to quickly get inside to make changes. Let's have a quick look at the material to see what makes it special. It's basically just these two nodes. This is the image node that has the trim sheet assigned. Its name must be trim image. If that is not the case, the panel will not find it anymore, and you would lose some features, such as the ability to change the texture on the fly. And this attribute node makes sure that the texture is applied correctly by using the UV coordinates that the Trimflow node tree generates. This node is not strictly necessary. It still does not hurt to include it though, and it does become essential in more complex material setups when a second UV set is used. For more information, visit the documentation or have a look into Trimflow's example projects. Finally, the little setup on the right will make the decal invisible on the back. This prevents shadows and reflections between decal and the target surface when rendered in cycles. That's about it. Be sure to include those few features into your material. Apart from that, you are free to do what you want. By the way, you can easily include the attribute and trim image node via the Add menu, or just start with creating a material in Trimflow's Create panel and build upon that. Next in the material settings is tiling, which is basically the amount of texture repetitions. The auto tiling button behind it sets the tiling value automatically based on the decals and the texture's properties. It's not always a perfect hit, but still extremely useful. As a shortcut, there's also the Quick Adjust Tiling button right below the decal stack. Clicking it executes auto tiling. Shift-click increases tiling by 1. Control-click decreases tiling by 1. This is great for doing quick and lazy adjustments without going into the material settings first. The next section is all about the trim sheet and mapping. By adjusting these settings, you basically define the area of the texture that is then projected onto the decal. The head and tail settings specify how large the trim's end pieces are in the horizontal UV space and which part is tileable. For more information about the head and tail feature, have a look into the written documentation. If you use conventional trims without head and tail, just leave it at 0. These trim settings can be saved as preset, which then enables you to easily pick trims from a drop-down menu above. We have also seen that same menu when we created our decal in the first place. If you add a new trim sheet of your own, then the whole texture will get squashed into the decal by default. What you should do then is to set and save the mapping settings for each trim individually. Once you made your trim settings, just click the Save Mapping Settings button and enter a name for that entry that will later appear in the menu. Those presets will be saved into a JSON file. Each texture file can have one JSON file that is used to store information about that sheet. Trimflow will handle those files automatically in the background. You just need to make sure that they don't get lost and are located in the same folder as the texture itself. Also make sure that you, as a user, have write permission for that folder. Once saved, you never have to set the mapping settings for a trim manually again. Last but not least, we have a few settings that become relevant once you bake the decals that you have created. Check out the video in the upper right corner to learn more about baking trim decals. New in Trimflow 2.0 is the color setting. If you assign colors to your decals and bake them with the Color ID mode, you will get a color mask that you can use in Substance Painter or Designer, for example. By the way, Trimflow comes with these 3 trim sheets. You can of course use them in your work, but first and foremost, Trimflow is a tool set, not an asset library. There are tons of trims and sheets out there that can be used, and you also can and should create your own. There's even a little powerful Blender add-on called Z-Shot that we released earlier this year that can render trims and even automatically write the JSON file that Trimflow can read. You should definitely take a look at this if you'd like to create your own trims or brushes with Blender. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. Please let me know in the comments if you missed something and what you would like to see in another video.